"I need a marriage contract," he said, swirling his scotch like he was announcing a business merger. "I've worked too hard to leave anything to chance." I smiled, set down my fork, and told him that sounded completely reasonable. What he didn't know, what nobody in that restaurant knew, was that the woman sitting across from him owned more square footage in this city than his entire family combined. My name is Mara Collingwood. I'm 38 years old, and I grew up watching my mother cry over bank statements on the kitchen floor of our rented townhouse in Barrie, Ontario, while my father explained, patiently and without remorse, that the money was gone because he'd invested it in something that was going to change everything. It never changed anything. What it changed was us. I was 11 the first time I understood that money could be used as a weapon, not spent, not saved, but wielded. My father didn't earn more than my mother. He just controlled more. The joint account, the mortgage decisions, the car payments, all of it filtered through him. My mother was a registered nurse working double shifts at the regional hospital, but she didn't know what their savings looked like until the day she needed them and they weren't there. The divorce took 3 years and left her with nothing but the furniture and a lesson she passed on to me in the kitchen one night when I was 16, stirring soup and trying not to cry about something stupid at school. She said, "Know your own numbers, Mara, always. Whatever happens, know your own numbers." I took that seriously, maybe too seriously, but I don't think so anymore. I built my first real income stream at 24, almost by accident. I was working as a junior project coordinator for a commercial property management firm in Toronto, and I kept noticing the same inefficiency across every building they managed, the way vendors invoiced, the way maintenance requests got lost between departments, the way nobody could pull a clear cost report without a week of back and forth. So I built a system, just for my own sanity at first, a set of spreadsheets that talked to each other and auto-generated the reports my bosses kept asking me to spend Fridays producing manually. My director noticed. Then her director noticed. Then someone asked if it could be adapted for their portfolio in Calgary. It could, and suddenly I had a product. By the time I was 30, SiteTrack, my property operations platform, was licensed to 17 commercial real estate firms across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. I still worked my regular job for 2 more years after that, partly out of habit and partly because I didn't fully trust what was happening. When the monthly licensing revenue crossed $41,000, I finally let myself believe it was real. I quit, registered a company, hired a part-time developer and an accountant, and kept living exactly as I had before. Same apartment in Leslieville, same 2011 Honda Fit with the cracked dashboard, same grocery runs to no frills. People assume that when money comes, the lifestyle follows automatically. It doesn't. Not for everyone. For me, the invisible life was a choice I made consciously, and I made it because of what happened with Owen. Owen was my partner when SiteTrack first started gaining traction. We'd been together 2 years when he figured out the income wasn't coming from my salary. I hadn't hidden it exactly. I just hadn't volunteered it and he hadn't asked. When he found out, something shifted in him within about 2 weeks. He started talking about a joint investment opportunity his cousin was involved in. He started suggesting we upgrade to a condo together in a neighborhood we definitely couldn't afford on his income alone. He started using the word "we" in sentences that had nothing to do with the relationship and everything to do with the money. It ended badly and it ended fast. And I walked away from it with one more lesson to stack on top of my mother's. Keep the numbers private. Let people see you first. So that's what I did. For years, that's what I did. I met my fiancé at a friend's birthday dinner in Yorkville. One of those long table restaurant situations where you don't know half the people and end up talking to whoever happens to sit beside you. He sat beside me. He was charming in a specific way that took me a while to place. The kind of charming that's been practiced, refined, deployed. He was a senior associate at a commercial architecture firm, drove a leased BMW, had opinions about wine that he shared freely, and laughed loudly at his own stories in a way that somehow still worked. I was entertained. I was also lonely, which I didn't admit to myself until much later. We dated for just over 2 years. He was attentive at first, curious about me in the ways that feel good at the beginning, asking about my childhood, my ambitions, what I wanted my life to look like in 10 years. He assumed my answer to the financial parts was modest, and I let him assume. When he asked what I did, I said I ran a small software consultancy. When he saw my car, he made a joke about it that I laughed off. When I suggested cheaper restaurants, he went along with it while occasionally steering us toward nicer ones, which I noticed but didn't address. I cared about him. I want to be honest about that because it matters to the rest of the story. I actually cared about him. I thought he cared about me. The shift started about 4 months before the night at Canoe. He started talking about what marriage would look like financially, casually, the way you bring up traffic or weekend plans. His father's divorce had cost him everything, he said. A colleague had lost his house because of inadequate legal protection going into a marriage. He'd been reading about prenuptial agreements, not as a lack of trust, he emphasized, but as financial intelligence. Smart people did this. Progressive couples did this. It was about protecting what you'd built. Each individual comment was easy to dismiss. Accumulated, they formed a pattern I recognized but kept choosing not to name. Then came the dinner at Canoe, on the 54th floor with a view of the harbor I'd seen a dozen times and still found beautiful. He waited until the main course, then set down his fork and looked at me in a way that felt rehearsed. He said he needed a marriage contract, that he'd worked too hard to leave anything to chance, that he hoped I understood it wasn't personal, it was just practical, and that most financially aware people did this these days. I set down my own fork. I kept my hand still, though something had gone cold in my chest. I told him it made complete sense. I told him I was glad he brought it up. He exhaled visibly, the relief of a man who expected resistance and didn't get it. He squeezed my hand across the table and told me I was different from other women, that I was rational, that he'd known from the start I was someone who understood how the real world worked. I smiled and thanked him, and thought, you have no idea how the real world works. He mentioned his lawyer had already begun drafting something. Already, past tense, before this conversation, before he'd told me, before I'd had any say. I drove home on the Gardner thinking about my mother on that kitchen floor. I thought about Owen and his cousin's investment opportunity. I thought about the fact that the man I was planning to marry had apparently decided at some point before this dinner that I was a financial risk and hadn't found it important enough to discuss with me before instructing a lawyer. I called my solicitor from the parking garage of my building. Her name is Gwen. She has been my lawyer for 6 years. She once described herself as someone who exists to make sure nobody ever successfully takes advantage of clever women, and she answered on the second ring. Tell me, she said. I told her everything. The dinner, the speech, the pre-drafted paperwork, the hand squeeze, the compliment about being rational. Gwen was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then she said, he thinks he's the one with assets to protect. That's exactly what he thinks? She laughed, a short, dry sound. Right, so here's what we're going to do. The agreement his lawyer sent over arrived 5 days later. It was 22 pages. I made a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and read every word. By page 4, I had stopped being surprised and started taking notes. The asset division clause specified that any property purchased during the marriage would be considered his in the event of separation unless I could demonstrate I had contributed more than 55% of the purchase price. Documented, verified, and submitted within 30 days of separation. 55%, not half, more than half, just to qualify for a fair share. There was a clause waiving my right to spousal support under any circumstances, including if the marriage lasted decades. There was a clause, and I had to read it twice, specifying that any increase in value of his professional portfolio or firm equity during the marriage would be considered his sole property, but that any business interests I might develop would be subject to a joint property assessment. Any business I built during our marriage would be partly his. Any success he had during our marriage would be entirely his. I sent the document to Gwen without any message. She called me 11 minutes later. Where did he find this lawyer? She said. It wasn't a question. I don't know. This isn't a prenuptial agreement, she said. This is a subordination clause dressed in prenuptial language. If you signed this, you would have fewer protections than a tenant. I know. Okay. Her voice shifted into what I had come to think of as her operational register, clipped, focused, pleasant in the way that a scalpel is pleasant, precise, and purposeful. Here's our counter. We accept the general framework. Separate property stays separate, clean division of jointly acquired assets, no claims on premarital holdings. All of that we agree to because it's standard and it's fair. But we add one requirement: full financial disclosure from both parties. Everything. Tax returns for 5 years. All accounts. All investments. All property. All business interests. Valuations current as of the signing date. I already knew why this mattered. He didn't know what he was asking for. His lawyer will read it as due diligence, Gwen said. He'll think it's protecting him. And when he actually reads my disclosure, then he'll understand what he's been doing for the last 2 years, she said, and we'll see what he does with that information. The week between sending our counterproposal and the scheduled signing appointment was one of the strangest of my life. I went to work. I responded to client emails. I had a SiteTrack integration meeting with a hotel group out of Vancouver and talked calmly for 90 minutes about API documentation and onboarding timelines. I had dinner with my fiancé twice, once at his place, once at his new Korean restaurant on Queen West that he'd been wanting to try. He was in a good mood, lighter than he'd been in months, I realized. The marriage contract conversation was, for him, resolved. He'd raised it, I'd agreed, the paperwork was in motion. Problem handled. I watched him more carefully that week than I ever had. I noticed how he positioned himself in photographs, always slightly forward, slightly central. How he mentioned the value of his firm's recent projects in conversations where the other person hadn't asked. How he described his income to new acquaintances with a precision that was, in retrospect, too practiced to be casual. He wasn't lying exactly, he was curating, presenting a version of himself that was permanently mid-ascent, permanently on the verge of something bigger. I had found that attractive once. Now I saw it for what it was, a performance sustained by an audience that kept accepting it without question. I had been part of that audience. For 2 years I had been the most important member of it. The signing was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at his lawyer's office in the financial district, a glass tower on Bay Street with marble floors and elevator music, and the kind of art in the lobby that costs more than the annual salary of everyone who walks past it each day. I arrived at 1:50. I wore a blazer I'd owned for 4 years over a plain white shirt. I imagined, exactly like what he thought I was. Competent, unremarkable. The kind of woman you underestimate without even deciding to. He was already in the conference room when I arrived. He stood, smiled, kissed my cheek. He looked good. Fresh haircut, his charcoal suit, the watch he wore to client meetings. He squeezed my shoulders and told me this would be quick and straightforward, and then we could get dinner somewhere nice to celebrate. His lawyer, I'll call him the lawyer because that's all he was to me, was in his late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who had spent a career making wealthy clients feel clever. He shook my hand with practiced warmth and said he'd heard wonderful things. Then Gwen arrived. I heard her before I saw her, the specific sound of someone who walks like they're always slightly ahead of schedule. She came into the conference room carrying a single slim briefcase, exchanged a professionally cordial handshake with the lawyer, and sat down beside me with an expression that was perfectly composed and communicating nothing except complete control. The lawyer opened his folder. He presented my fiancé's financial disclosure first, the firm valuation, the condo mortgage balance, the leased vehicle, the investment account, with the quiet pride of a man revealing something impressive, and it wasn't unimpressive by most measures. He had built something real, a firm worth just over $380,000 in verified valuation, a condo he'd purchased 5 years ago now worth $640,000, with a mortgage balance of $490,000, an investment portfolio of just under $95,000. My fiancé leaned back in his chair. He looked settled, satisfied. He glanced at me once, a small reassuring look, as if to say, see, nothing to worry about. Gwen waited until the lawyer finished. Then she opened her briefcase and placed a folder on the table. It was considerably thicker than the one the lawyer had just closed. She slid it across the surface with one hand, unhurried, and it landed with a weight that made the lawyer pause before he opened it. My fiancé reached over before the lawyer could, pulled out the first page, and read it. The color left his face in a single, slow withdrawal like a tide going out. "What is this?" he said. His voice was careful, not angry yet, confused, and underneath the confusion, something else, a recognition that was still assembling itself. "That's my financial disclosure," I said, exactly what was requested. Gwen spoke in the tone she used for reading contracts aloud, neutral, precise, just above conversational volume. "Ms. Collingwood is the founder and majority owner of SiteTrack, a property operations software platform currently licensed by commercial real estate firms in Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, and as of this past March, 2 firms in Manitoba. The platform generates approximately $43,000 per month in net licensing revenue." The lawyer had gone very still. "She owns 4 residential income properties in the Greater Toronto Area and 2 in Hamilton," Gwen continued, generating combined monthly rental income of approximately $19,000. She holds a diversified investment portfolio valued at $2.8 million, a commercial property interest in a mixed-use development in Guelph, and 2 registered business accounts with combined balances. "Stop." His voice cracked on the word. He set the page down. He was staring at me. "Stop, just stop for a second." The room was completely silent. He looked at me the way you look at a face that should be familiar and suddenly isn't, like the features are the same, but the person behind them has been replaced. "Mara." My name, just my name, was nothing attached to it, no anger, no accusation yet, just disorientation. "What? How long?" "SiteTrack has been operating for 10 years, I said. "The real estate portfolio started when I was 27. He shook his head slowly, not disagreeing, processing. "You let me think." "I didn't tell you everything," I said, keeping my voice even. "You didn't ask. You made assumptions, and I let you make them because I wanted you to know me before you knew my balance sheet." His jaw tightened. I watched him work through emotions the way you watch someone search for something they were certain they put down, right here, right in this spot. "This is." He stopped, started again. "Everyone is going to think." And there it was. Not, "How did I miss this?" Not, "What does this mean for us?" Not even, "I'm hurt." Just, "What will people think?" "What are they going to think?" I asked, though I already knew. He looked away from me toward the window, toward Bay Street and the gray October sky beyond it. "My clients, my partners, they already have opinions about. They're going to think I married someone for." He couldn't finish it. "I spent years building a reputation. People respect what I've built. If they find out that you..." "That I have more?" I said quietly. "Yes." The word was almost a whisper. The lawyer had been sitting very still. He cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a short recess." "No." My fiancé stood up. His chair pushed back hard against the floor. The sound sharp in the quiet room. I need some air. I need to think." He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and walked out. He didn't slam the door. That surprised me. He closed it quietly, and somehow that was worse. The lawyer began gathering his papers with the careful efficiency of a man pretending the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. He apologized twice. He said they would be in touch. He left. Gwen waited until the door closed, then leaned back in her chair and looked at me with an expression that was not quite a smile, and not quite something else, somewhere between satisfied and careful. "How are you?" she said. "I don't know," I told her honestly. I thought I'd feel something clearer than this. She nodded. "You just ended a relationship. Even if it had to end, that's still a loss." "Did I end it?" I asked. "Or did he?" She considered this seriously, the way Gwen considered most things. "Does it matter?" I drove home slowly. The city was doing its mid-afternoon thing, that particular Tuesday quiet that falls over downtown between the lunch rush and the end of the workday. I parked underground and sat in my car for a long time, my hands in my lap, thinking about nothing specific and everything at once. He called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He texted twice. I read both messages and didn't respond. The following 4 days was strange in a particular way I wasn't expecting. Not dramatic, not devastated, exactly, more like the feeling after a very long flight, when you finally landed somewhere and your body hasn't quite caught up to the fact that you're not moving anymore. I worked. I ate. I took long walks along the lakeshore because it was late October and cold, and the trail was mostly empty and I could think without interruption. My sister called from Ottawa. I told her a version of the situation, the broad shape of it, and she listened the way she always did, without rushing toward advice. When I finished, she said, "You know what I keep thinking about? He wasn't angry that you had secrets. He was angry that your secrets made him look smaller." She was right. That was exactly it. He texted again on the 5th day, "We need to talk. Come over Thursday, please." I stared at the message for several minutes. A part of me knew I should say no. A part of me. The part that had loved him, the part that still remembered the good version of what we'd been needed to hear, what he would say when he had time to compose himself. I went. His condo was on the 18th floor of a building in Liberty Village, the kind of place that photographed beautifully and lived in with a slight echo. Too much glass, not enough softness. He answered the door looking like someone who had not been sleeping. His shirt was clean, but his face wasn't. I don't mean that unkindly. He just looked like a person who had been sitting with something very uncomfortable for 5 days. He made coffee. We sat at his kitchen island. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the counter for a long moment before he looked at me. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for the prenup terms, the original ones. That was, Gwen's read on them was accurate. It wasn't balanced. I could see that once I wasn't in the middle of it." I hadn't expected that. I let it settle before I said anything. "Thank you," I said. "I mean that." He nodded. Then he looked up at me with an expression that I recognized as the one he wore when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. "I still want to marry you." My chest did something complicated. "But I need you to understand my position," he continued. "My reputation is..." He paused, choosing words. "The way my clients see me, the way my partners see me, it's built on a specific perception. And if people find out that you're worth significantly more than I am, that perception shifts. I'm not saying it's fair. I know it's not fair. But it's the reality of the industry I work in." "What are you asking?" I said. He exhaled. "A confidentiality agreement, just between us and our immediate families, if they already know. Nobody else. We present as equals. Two professionals, building something together. It doesn't have to be anyone's business how the assets break down." I set my coffee down carefully. "You're asking me to sign a legal agreement that requires me to conceal my own financial life," I said, "for the duration of our marriage." "It's not concealment," he said quickly. "It's privacy. Lots of high net worth couples do this." "Who would I be hiding it from?" "Friends, colleagues." "Your colleagues," I said. He didn't answer. "Your mother?" I asked. He looked away. I sat with that for a moment. His mother, who had met me 6 times and referred to me, twice in my presence, as a good stable choice for her son, meaning I understood that I was unlikely to outshine him. "You want me to help you maintain a fiction," I said, "so that the people in your life will continue to see you the way you need to be seen." "That's an unfair characterization." "Is it?" He stood up, started moving around the kitchen in the way he did when he was agitated. Not pacing exactly, more like orbiting, unable to stay still but also unable to go anywhere. "I'm trying to find a solution that works for both of us. I'm trying to make this work, Mara. Isn't that worth something?" I watched him orbit the kitchen, and I thought about what my mother had said on the kitchen floor and what I'd learned from Owen, and the 10 years of building something carefully and quietly and on my own terms. I thought about what it would mean to sign that agreement, not just legally, but practically. Every conversation where the subject came up, every dinner with his colleagues where I'd need to calculate what I was allowed to say, every year of that compounding. "I think you love me," I said, and I meant it. "Or the version of me you thought you knew. But the full version of me, the one that includes the thing you need me to hide, That version makes you uncomfortable enough that you want a legal document to manage the discomfort. He stopped moving. That's not. You don't want a partner, I said, quietly but without hesitation. You want a supporting character. Someone who makes you look good without complicating the narrative. The silence that followed was the longest kind, the kind that isn't awkward because it's empty, but because it's full of things neither person can unsay. He looked at me, I looked back. Whatever we were searching for in each other's faces, I don't think we found it. I'm not going to sign it, I said, and I don't think we should get married. I put on my coat. I picked up my bag. He didn't stop me, and I think we both knew he wasn't going to. He said as I was opening the door, "You'll regret this." I turned around. He was standing in the middle of his very beautiful kitchen, with his mug still in his hand and his face doing something complicated and sad. And I felt something that surprised me. Not anger, not triumph. Just a clean, tired grief for the 2 years we'd spent and the future we'd imagined that had never really existed. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I told him. "I genuinely do." I closed the door gently behind me. I took the elevator down 18 floors and walked out into the cold October air and stood on the sidewalk for a minute, just breathing. I called my sister on the walk back to where I'd parked. She picked up immediately, like she'd been expecting it. "It's done," I said. "I know," she said. "Come to Ottawa next weekend. I'll make the soup." I said yes. The next few weeks were predictable in their unpredictability. He talked, of course he did. Discreetly at first, and then less so. The story that circulated through our mutual acquaintances was his preferred version. I had withheld critical information throughout our relationship, misrepresented my situation, and effectively deceived him. Some people believed it immediately. Some sent carefully worded texts that were neither fish nor fowl. They wanted the drama without having to take a position. A few reached out directly to ask what had actually happened. For those few, I told the truth. I kept it simple. He asked for a prenuptial agreement before he knew what he was asking for. When the financial disclosure process revealed my situation, he requested that I sign a confidentiality agreement, suppressing that information from his professional and personal networks. I declined. Most people, once they heard that version, got very quiet in a specific way. One of his architecture partners emailed me 3 weeks later, not someone I'd known well, but someone I'd met at several dinners. He said he wanted me to know that the story he'd been told didn't add up, and that he was sorry for the way it had been handled. I thanked him and meant it. Gwen, for her part, was characteristically satisfied. The problem with building a reputation on performance, she told me over lunch one afternoon, is that the performance eventually has to interact with reality. I thought about that for a long time. I threw myself into work the way you do when you're avoiding sitting still, which is to say productively but not happily. The Manitoba expansion went well. I started looking at a property in Nova Scotia that my portfolio manager had flagged months earlier. I updated SiteTrack's core module for the first time in 2 years, and the response from existing clients was better than I'd hoped. I was accomplishing things. I knew I was accomplishing things. I also knew that accomplishment and contentment are not the same currency and cannot be exchanged for one another. My sister visited in January and did not pretend everything was fine, which I appreciated. We watched old movies and ate too much pasta, and she told me, once unprompted, "You know you can want someone and still know they're wrong for you." "I know," I said. "I just want to make sure you're not confusing grieving the relationship with doubting the decision." I thought about that for days. Grieving the relationship, doubting the decision. They are, I concluded, not mutually exclusive, and being able to sit with both at the same time without resolving either one into the other. That's actually the work. I saw a therapist through the winter. She was quiet and methodical and had a way of asking questions that didn't lead you anywhere she'd already decided to take you. In our 6th session, she asked me something I hadn't expected. Did you hide your financial life to protect yourself, or to test the people you let close? I sat with that for the rest of the hour and then for about a week afterward. Both, I eventually admitted. It was always both. And understanding that, really sitting with it, changed something in how I thought about what came next. Spring arrived, and I started saying yes to things I'd been declining. A colleague's gallery opening, A fundraiser dinner for a literacy program at a downtown library where I'd signed up to volunteer at a book sorting table without fully thinking through what that meant in terms of small talk with strangers. It was at the book sorting table that I met him. He introduced himself as Graham O.C. He was tall, unhurried, wearing a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, and he was holding a box of donated children's books with the expression of someone who had genuinely not anticipated how many Berenstain Bears volumes a single fundraiser could generate. "Tell me you're better at organization than I am," he said. "Depends," I said. "What's your system?" "Vibes," he said. "Pure vibes. It's going terribly." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you. We sorted books for 2 hours and talked the entire time. He was an emergency physician at Toronto Western, originally from Mississauga, the son of Ghanaian immigrants who had moved to Canada in the 80s and built, he said, the most unnecessarily large vegetable garden in the history of Brampton. He had a younger brother who was a high school science teacher in Hamilton and an opinion about every book that passed through our hands that he offered freely and without apology. He asked about my work. I said I ran a software company focused on commercial property management. "Does it require you to be in an office?" he asked. "Mostly no," I said. "Lucky," he said. "I work wherever the emergency is, which is less glamorous than it sounds." He was funny without performing it, curious without angling toward anything. When the event wrapped up, he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime, and the ease with which he asked it, no calculation, no presentation, was the thing that made me say yes. We met for coffee 4 days later. Then dinner the following week. Then a walk along the lakeshore on a Saturday afternoon in late April when the city was doing the particular thing it does at the beginning of spring. Cautiously, like it doesn't quite trust the warmth yet. On our 4th real date, we were sitting on the roof patio of his apartment building in Roncesvalles with takeout and cheap wine and the kind of conversation that meanders without ever losing the thread. And I decided to tell him. All of it. SiteTrack, the revenue, the properties, the portfolio, the 2 years with my previous fiancé, the prenup, the conference room, the confidentiality agreement he'd asked me to sign, all of it. I told him in the same level voice I'd tell anyone anything important. I watched his face while I talked. He listened without interrupting. His expression didn't do the thing I'd been watching for. The recalculation, the shift, the moment where curiosity becomes assessment. He just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's an incredible amount of work to have built, the software especially." "The real estate was partly luck," I said, "timing. The software wasn't." "No," I agreed, "the software wasn't." He picked up his wine glass, looked at it for a second. "I make about $230,000 a year," he said, "which feels like a lot and also somehow never enough in this city, and I have a fairly unimpressive car and I rent, which I keep being told is a mistake by people who own property, including my brother." He smiled. "I want you to know that because you just told me something important and honest and I want to be honest back. Your situation doesn't intimidate me. It makes me think you're interesting and driven, which I already thought, so it's consistent information." I looked at him across the patio table with the city spread out below us and the sky turning the particular color it turns over Toronto in late spring. A complicated orange-pink that has no clean name, and felt something unlock. Not an ending, a beginning. We have been together for 8 months now. Last week we were making dinner in my kitchen, his pasta, my salad, an equitable division of labor. And he told me, while he was draining the rigatoni, that he wanted to ask me something important. I turned around. He was not holding a ring. He was holding the colander, steam rising, looking at me with an expression that was completely unguarded. He said, "I want to build a life with you, the real version of it. I'm not interested in performances or optics or what anyone else thinks it should look like. I just want the actual thing." He paused. "If you want that too." I crossed the kitchen and I took the colander out of his hands and set it in the sink, and I told him yes, that I wanted exactly that, that I had been waiting, without quite knowing I was waiting to be asked that question by someone who already knew the answer, didn't depend on what I was worth. I still drive the 2011 Honda Fit with the cracked dashboard. I still shop at No Frills. I still live in my Leslieville apartment, though Graham has slowly installed himself into it in the way people do when they belong somewhere. A coffee mug left in the cupboard, a pair of running shoes by the door, a dog-eared copy of a novel on the nightstand. My mother taught me to know my own numbers, and I always have. What she couldn't have known, what I had to learn the longer way, is that the right person won't ask you to pretend the numbers don't exist. They'll see the numbers and see you clearly and understand that both things are true at the same time. You built something remarkable, and you are also, separately and completely, worth knowing. That's not a settlement. That's not a compromise. That is exactly what I was always hoping for, even before I knew how to say so. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain. I know that because he told it that way and some people believed him. The woman who hid things, the woman who ambushed him, the woman who, if you squint at it a certain way, manipulated a man into a conference room and humiliated him in front of his own lawyer. I've sat with that version. I've held it up to the light and looked at it honestly, the way my therapist kept asking me to do. And what I found, when I was being truly honest, was this. I did hide things. Not to trap him, not to engineer a confrontation, but because I had learned, the hard way and more than once, that money changes how people see you before they've had the chance to actually see you. That wasn't deception, that was self-protection. There's a difference, and it matters. What I didn't do was lie. I never told him I was someone I wasn't. I let him make assumptions, and I let those assumptions stand, because I wanted to know whether the person underneath the numbers was someone worth loving. That's not a test I'm ashamed of. It's a question I think more people should ask. What happened in that conference room was simply cause and effect, in the most straightforward sense. He asked for full financial disclosure. He got it. The consequences that followed weren't something I engineered. They were the natural result of a situation he had set in motion by assuming, without ever checking, that he was the more powerful person in the room. Assumptions have weight. Eventually, they land somewhere. What I keep coming back to, months later, is the moment he stood up and his first thought wasn't about us. It was about what his clients would think, what his partners would think, what his mother would think. And I understood, in that moment, that integrity, the real kind, not the performed kind, had never actually been part of his calculation. He had built a life around how things looked, and when reality didn't match the performance was what he fought to protect. I think about Gwen, who spent years watching people try to use legal language to reduce other people. She knew, the moment she read his original draft, what he was actually asking for. And she helped me respond not with anger, but with clarity, with intelligence that didn't flinch and didn't apologize. That kind of clear-eyed competence, the willingness to understand exactly what a situation requires and meet it on those terms, is something I'm still learning from her. And then there's Graham, who heard everything, every number, every property, every embarrassing detail of the prenup story, and said, essentially, "That's interesting, tell me more." He didn't recalibrate, he didn't perform the right reaction. He just kept being curious about me, which is the quietest and most durable form of respect I've encountered. I think what this whole experience taught me, more than anything, is that character is revealed under pressure, not constructed there. The man I was going to marry showed me who he was the moment things stopped going according to his plan. And I showed myself who I was too. Someone who could sit in a very uncomfortable room and tell the truth without needing anyone's permission to do so. That took something I didn't know I had built alongside the software and the properties, a kind of inner steadiness, the willingness to lose something rather than shrink myself to keep it. My mother said, "Know your own numbers." I always have, but she also lived a life that quietly showed me another truth, that the people worth building with are the ones who see your numbers and still look you in the eye, not past you, not through you, at you. Graham does that. Every single day he does that. That's the part of the story I'm still writing, and I mean to take my time with it.